Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for a trip to Dubai and Abu Dhabi with the Traveling Librarian. We're going to join Jeff Klapes, the Traveling Librarian, for another of his popular armchair travel presentations. This series highlights travel photography and stories and travel tips about destinations around the world. This month, we're going to journey to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, the two largest of the 7 United Arab Emirates. Best known for their rapid growth, cutting-edge architecture, and lavish lifestyles. There's much more to see if you dig a little deeper. Mosques, markets, and a mix of ethnicities and cultures make the UAE a challenging place to live and work, but intriguing to visit. And Jeff here is the recently retired head of reference services at the Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield. And he's, of course, an avid traveler and photographer. So all 70 of us or so who are watching live and those that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us this afternoon. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Robert. Excuse me. And thank you all for joining me, particularly for those of you who are in the Boston area, because it's an absolutely gorgeous, sunny summer afternoon. So thank you for joining an online Zoom program. As Robert said, I love to travel, and I love to combine my love of travel with my love of still photography too. So that's why my travel programs are kind of a mix of the two. This is a trip that I did about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think you'll probably see as we go through this that things change so quickly in the UAE right now. In fact, even I felt like while I was there for a week or so, skyscrapers were popping up by the time my trip ended. So any of you who might be planning to travel there in the near future will probably see things that are considerably different from when I was there, even not that long ago. But anyway, I'm going to get started and share my screen. So hopefully now you should be able to see. Does that look good?
Jeff, that looks good, yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so we will get started. First, I want to kind of put the area on the map. Dubai and Abu Dhabi that we'll really be focusing on today are 2 of the 7 of the Emirates in the United Arab Emirates, which is a country in and of itself. And Dubai is the 2nd largest in area after Abu Dhabi and has the largest population. You can see, oh, I need to turn on my pointer. You can see we're talking about this area right here at the southern end of the Persian Gulf. And zooming in a little bit closer, although it is a desert, obviously this is Arabia, it can be quite humid on the coast and extremely hot, as you might imagine, in the summer. My trip was in February, which is a pretty good time to go there. It's very warm. It was certainly in the mid to high 80s, but it is nowhere near as unpleasant as it would be if you get into the summer months. And just on this map, I just wanted to add, here's a map of Massachusetts or an outline just to give you a rough idea of the scale that we're talking about here. It's not that big an area. I also, on this trip, traveled to Oman, which I'll mention briefly, and I have a separate program on that if you're ever interested in it. They are similar, but extremely different places. The UAE was originally called the Trucial States, and they were British protectorates until 1971, when all of them united. In fact, this whole area, including Bahrain and Qatar up in the north, were all part of these original British protectorates that became their own country in the early 1970s. Bahrain and Qatar backed out not long after that, and they since then have become their own independent nations, while the 7 Emirates that remain are now considered the United Arab Emirates. So when I was there, what we're going to look at today is really just along this coast here between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. I also spent quite a bit of time traveling around Oman, which, to be perfectly honest, I liked better. And if you're interested in Oman, I will be happy to maybe do a program for you at some point. They obviously have very similar cultures and similar histories. but Oman has retained much more of its traditional culture, I think, and makes for travel that's a little bit more like going back into the traditional past, whereas the UAE is clearly a very modern, forward-thinking place that's almost become like the Las Vegas of the Middle East. What's interesting about the UAE, and I'll talk initially about Dubai, but this is true for most of the other Emirates as well. There's about 2.5 million people in Dubai, give or take. But what many people don't realize is that almost the entire population, anywhere between, say, 85 to 90% of the population, are actually foreign guest workers, mostly from Asia, South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, a number of other places. And they come to the UAE for work so that they can send money back to their families in their home countries. But it makes for a very skewed population when you are there. It's a very multicultural population as a result, but the actual native Emiratis are remarkably few, and they lead an extremely different lifestyle from the guest workers who are there. So focusing initially on Dubai, which is here, it's on the Gulf Coast, Persian Gulf Coast. It has amazing beaches. And it's centered, interestingly enough, you wouldn't necessarily expect this, it's centered on a river. There aren't a whole lot of rivers in Arabia, and what few there are pretty small and pretty dry. Dubai Creek is this little bit that comes in here. It's barely, 5 miles long. And that is where the original settlement for Dubai decades ago started. But of course, now it has spread up and down the coast 20 miles in either direction with enormous amounts of development. Here, in fact, is a very old postcard that shows what the original settlement of Dubai was on that creek. Until World War II, this is really all there was of Dubai, and it was no bigger than, it wasn't much bigger than Tewkesbury, to be perfectly honest. It was a trading port. There was pearl diving industry going on. The pearl trade actually collapsed in the 1930s for two reasons. One was the depression, the worldwide depression, which meant that far fewer people were buying pearls. But also that was the time when people figured out how to culture pearls and actually artificially grow pearls so that they didn't have to be gathered in the wild, so to speak. So that really changed things in Dubai at the time. And then, of course, after World War II, in the late 50s and early 60s, oil was discovered in this area. And that completely changed the entire area, and development took off and continues today. So now it looks like this. It has a growing population. There's continuous massive construction. And of course, it's known for its amazing skyline with all kinds of different skyscrapers going up, including what is, at least for the moment, the tallest building in the world. We'll visit that as well. I chose to stay in the old part of town, which is not something a lot of people do. The old part, which is called Dira, is an area called Bur Dubai, which is much more walkable. I wouldn't call it really historic and traditional. It's the closest thing Dubai has to that, but there are far fewer skyscrapers. There's a lot more street life. It's much less dependent on car travel, and it's certainly much less expensive. There are all kinds of gorgeous hotels and resorts and so forth that you can stay in, and they tend to be very high-end and very expensive. So I chose, because I don't tend to stay in places like that when I travel, so I stayed in the New Peninsula Hotel, which is hardly an attractive building, but it was perfectly comfortable, perfectly clean, and very conveniently located to a lot of the things that I wanted to see, including the bus station, which made it easy for me to take day trips and so forth. That was the view from my hotel room. Here is the lobby, which is a little unusual for the decor, but it was a fun place. And here again is looking out at the bus terminal right across the street. Buses are incredibly cheap. And in fact, travel in general is very cheap because gas costs, pennies. compared to what it does in most of the rest of the world. I would definitely not rent a car if I were in Dubai. There are far easier ways to get around, either by taking public transportation or taxis or tours. The driving is actually kind of insane in Dubai, so I would avoid that. Buses to get from, say, here to Abu Dhabi are incredibly cheap and very quick. And again, one of the reasons I stayed in this particular part of the city is it's about as historic as you can get, Dubai. The area it's kind of sanitized history. They've restored a lot of stuff. It's not really as traditional as it would have been, say, 70 years ago, but it's still very pleasant and very walkable. This is the main downtown metro stop. You can see the Burj Khalifa way off in the background. And there's a number of historic monuments that have been rebuilt or restored to show you what life was like in Dubai before it changed so radically after World War II. This particular museum is the house of Sheikh Saeed Al Maktoum. It's a former mansion, and they've turned it into a very nice museum of the history of the city. And it shows a nice early style of architecture prior to all of the massive development. This is what most of the buildings tended to look like. You'll also find relatively few tourists in this part of the city, which makes it kind of nice. It's a very easy and safe place to walk around. This particular museum has a wonderful collection of stamps and coins and historic photos of Dubai before it began to develop, and a lot of documents. Here's some fun stamps from their stamp collection that show malaria mosquitoes all over the stamps. The towers that you can see here are worth pointing out too. These are called wind towers, and they're common both in old architecture and new architecture. The new ones tend to be reproductions, of course, but they're important because before modern development and of course before modern air conditioning, this was one of the ways in which the local architecture allowed for cooling the interior rooms. These towers stick way up, and they're specifically designed to bring what little breezes there might be and funnel them down through the interiors of what was made of mud brick. So the mud brick tends to cool the air and keep any breezes that they can get a hold of tend to keep the buildings very cool. As you can imagine, there's also a lot of overhangs to keep the shade, keep the sun from getting into the buildings, and also relatively small windows also that keep things cool. Those towers are actually an Iranian tradition, but because Iran is really very close right across the Persian Gulf, there was a lot of cross-pollination of designs and culture. Here I am, because I'm a public librarian, I of course have to visit the public library everywhere I go, and Dubai does have one right downtown. I can't say it was anywhere near as friendly as the Tewkesbury Public Library, but it was worth a visit. This is looking north from the older part of the city up towards where most of the modern new development is starting. We'll see a lot more of that as we go through. And just some interesting scenes of street life. Arabic is common throughout the UAE, of course, but so is English. Because the country is so cosmopolitan and has both visitors and workers coming from all over the world, English has become the lingua franca. So you certainly don't need to know Arabic in order to travel around. In fact, the assumption is that if you're talking to almost anybody, no matter what their nationality, they will almost always assume that you're going to start to speak in English. Oh, in fact, I just noticed in the Q&A, that was one of the questions people raised. I made an attempt to learn a little bit of Arabic before I went there, because I just like to do that when I travel, even a few basic phrases. And it's kind of fun to be able to do that. But actually, you're probably unlikely to meet a lot of Arabic speaking people, because most of the people that you're going to be dealing with in hotels, most of the workers that you're going to be dealing with in restaurants, and shops and tours and so forth are probably not actually native Emiratis. They are going to be guest workers who might come from any number of places. They could be Indian, they could be Bangladeshi, they could be Pakistani, they could be all over the place. So again, learning Arabic is really, it's not only not necessary, it's probably not even going to help you very much. English is what people are going to assume you speak. But you will see Arabic in signs, certainly street signs and so forth, all over the place. Browsing around kind of strolling around the historic district, there are some wonderful old mosques, and again, more restored buildings and museums. This is one of the neighborhood mosques. It is, of course, a Muslim country, so you will see mosques all over the place. There's a historic fort. There are quite a few of those throughout Arabia. Oman as well has quite a few of them. Mud brick forts that have been saved and restored. This particular one is called the Al-Fahidi Fort, and it's built right along the creek and has been turned into a museum again, kind of talking about the history of the city. The creek is a great area to explore. This is right where it comes out into the Persian Gulf. It's kind of a mix of traditional and modern. You'll see a lot of fishing boats. You'll see a lot of boats that are transporting goods around the Persian Gulf. The new city is kind of always off in the distance through the haze with the skyscrapers up north, but it really has at least a little bit of a feeling of what it must have been like before the explosion of population and development in the last half of the 20th century. There's a large fleet of a particular type of boat called a dhow, which you can see here, and they are still operational in the creek, and they ferry all kinds of goods from food, washing machines, clothing, all kinds of goods that are transported throughout the UAE, throughout Arabia, and also throughout the Persian Gulf. You'll see lots of those around. There are also water taxis, which you can see here, these covered boats that are a little smaller called abras, and they are a very cheap way to cross from one side of the creek to the other. In fact, they cost, I think, maybe the equivalent of 20, 25 cents US, and take 5 minutes to go back and forth. There is a subway. I'll show you some of the public transportation system in a little bit. But it's fun to take boat rides around and travel with the locals just across the river for just a coin or two. There's also an old souk or market in this area, which is a little touristy, but it's still a lot of fun, very atmospheric. And again, you will find all kinds of goods and crafts, not only from the UAE and traditional Arabian crafts, but from a lot of the cultures of the people who are working there. This particular, these photos are showing a place called Hindi Lane. There's a large Hindu population in Dubai, and this particular corner of the souk has Hindu temples and also a lot of traditional goods, food and crafts and so forth by that population as well. And just again, some more scenes up and down the creek. So I spent a lot of time here just because it felt a little bit more traditional and low-keyed. This mosque that you see on the left is the tallest in Dubai. It's called the Grand Mosque, and it's a recent replica of the original. The original mosque was built 120 years ago, around the turn of the last century, and this is a replica that was built, maybe 25 years ago. But there's some nice areas to stroll around. This zone is called the Bastakia Historic District, which was originally a home of a lot of Persian immigrants. And again, it's kind of been over-restored. It's a little antiseptic now, but it's still very pretty. And there's some very nice shops and cafes and restaurants that you can stroll around and get an idea of the historic style of architecture. Here's an opera with some people getting ready to board it. I would highly recommend doing a lot of this kind of local stuff, just because it gets you out on the street, meeting and chatting with local people. It's fun to kind of talk to them about what their lives are like. There are also plenty of tourist boats that you can take if you want to take a cruise. There's lots of dinner cruises that you can take on the creek and also up and down the coast along the Persian Gulf. So if you cross the creek, there is a very bustling commercial section called Dira, which has a lot of the specialized souks and so forth, and also quite a bit of shipping. That's what all these cranes are for, doing both construction and lading of goods onto the ships that are traveling around the Gulf. And there's a lot of very weird modern skyscrapers that you can see as well, mixed in with all this traditional architecture, including things like this that are decades old. There's some interesting buildings from the Art Deco period, which you wouldn't necessarily expect here, but as things started to grow, right before World War II, there's some kind of interesting buildings from that time period. And some beautiful parks. You can actually stroll up and down the creek, where there are some gorgeous public parks near the wharfage where all the dhows are moored. When I happened to be there, there were tons of petunias. It's a very over petuniaed city. I guess they grow really well there along the river. And then again, these very sort of odd modern buildings that you can see. And these loom over the Dow wharfage, which is still very, very much a working port, even though it's almost 200 years old. They've been back when Dubai was just a tiny Persian Gulf port that had barely a few hundred people at most. The Dows have been there since then, and they're still there. So now there are considerably more of them. And they're doing, as I said earlier, they're doing trading all over the Gulf and all over the Indian Ocean area. Blue tends to be a very common color, so you'll see that the old style of ship, but with beautiful colors. This was kind of interesting. This ended up never coming to pass, but I was fascinated by it while I was there. In the top of this architectural drawing, you can see this is the Dow wharfage with all these piers with hundreds and hundreds of boats. And at the time, there was a massive plan, very ambitious plan, to build something called the Aladdin complex, which was a series of these big gold and glass skyscrapers that were supposed to recall the shape of Aladdin's lamp, and then there would be elevated walkways between them, and it was supposed to be built over the entire wharfage area. But of course, the economic collapse of about 10 years ago was still going strong at the time, and it never ended up happening. And I was looking at it a couple of months ago just to see if there was any resurrection of the plans, and it never did. There's a whole bunch of massive complexes that were going to be built over the last 10 or 20 years, and some of them came to pass and some of them didn't. In some ways, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the different ones. You can walk all around this area, even though it's a working port. It's fine to travel around here on foot and observe the wharf activities. It's kind of fun. I just noticed in the Q&A, someone was asking about safety. Dubai is actually an extremely safe place to travel, mainly because the government is extremely strict if you do commit a crime. So don't do that. But even for single women, it is perfectly safe to walk around. Crime against tourists, other than perhaps pickpocketing and scams, which you have to kind of be aware of anywhere, but violent crime is almost unheard of. And it is perfectly safe to walk around alone at night, even, as I said, single women are also not even going to be bothered. This is a very conservative Muslim country, and that kind of thing just doesn't happen. The downside of that is, of course, it's because it's a very conservative Muslim government that treats crime very harshly. And that is true also of foreigners. So you might have heard some kind of harrowing stories of foreign travelers who get there and do something that they think is relatively harmless when traveling the rest of the world, like getting drunk in public or making an inappropriate pass at somebody on the street or swearing in public and things like that. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to more likely have trouble with. If you are not interested in doing stuff like that, you're going to be perfectly fine. It's a very, very safe place to travel. Again, just some scenes around this area. The Dira district is really fun for walking because, again, the modern part of Dubai that tends to get all of the publicity is very pedestrian unfriendly, whereas this part is quite different and more of a traditional walking city. So there's a lot of street life and lots of stores and restaurants and pedestrianized streets that you can walk down. Lots of shopping, both for tourists and also for locals who are buying food and household goods and crafts and so forth. The reason for this kind of humorous sign on the right, where carrying fish on the metro is prohibited, is basically because there's a huge fish market, which if you get a chance to go, it's worth visiting, is right near a big metro stop. So people will buy large fish and then get on the metro, and of course it smells, so they discourage that. The fish market, though, like many real fish markets around the world, starts incredibly early in the morning. So if you want to go, you kind of have to get up early when the fishermen do to see most of the lively stuff going on. I just noticed another question is there a dress code for women tourists? And the answer is yes and no. Foreign tourists, both men and women, are not expected to dress conservatively or wear veils and so forth. But in general, conservative dress is probably, it's better to err on the side of that. Certainly, unless you are in a contained tourist resort, you should not be walking around Dubai in a skimpy bathing suit, absolutely. And the same goes for men as well. If generally wearing relatively conservative clothing is a good idea when you're out and about in the city. If you're staying within a resort where the whole idea is to sit on the beach and sit by the pool, that's different. But when you are out and about in the city, you would certainly not be expected to dress in traditional Muslim garb, but you would be expected to be relatively sensitive to conservative sensibilities, and definitely not wearing skimpy clothes. That's for sure. Here's one of the fruit and vegetable markets. As I said, the fish market is lots of fun. I love to go to markets whenever I travel, even if I'm not actually going to buy anything. I just love street markets. There's so much to see. If you like traditional shoes and crafts and fabrics in particular, there's some beautiful fabrics if you wanted to have clothing made. And even among the locals, again, because there's such a variety of people from different cultures, some of whom are Muslim, some of whom are not. There are Hindus who live there. There are Muslims from different Muslim cultures where the degree of observance is quite different. So you will see people like this dressed head to foot, women, and you will see women dressed in much more contemporary Western dress as well, just depending on what culture they happen to come from. And that's not at all uncommon to see such a mix of people. And the same is true of men as well. There are spice markets and perfume markets. There's also, if you're interested in this sort of thing, there's an amazing place called Gold Land, which is the huge gold market. It's enormous. And even if you have no interest in gold, it's just kind of fun to walk around just to see. I've never seen so much gold in one place in my life. And it's a feast for the eyes, if nothing else. You'll see, again, here's some examples of just locals who are dressed in very different styles depending on what culture they may come from. These guys in particular are going to be Arabian. Anytime you see Arabs with traditional Arab robes, usually white, and their headscarves often indicate the color, and style tends to indicate where they come from. Omanis have a very, very particular look. Saudis have a very particular style. Here are more of the abras that help you cross the river. It does get very hot there, even in the winter. Here are some guys, workers, taking a break during lunch under what little shade there is. But I really enjoyed this part of the city, and I'm glad that I ended up staying here because it was just as convenient. The metro runs right through it. It's very easy to get around. And I just found it a little bit more real than staying in a big modern resort in the touristy part of town. This is actually a billboard, not a photo of real people, but I'm showing it to you because, again, this is a very typical Emirati greeting, where men touch their foreheads and noses in greeting. And these headscarves that are red and white are an indication that these are Emiratis. If they were Saudi, the headscarves tend to be all white, and that is more likely to indicate that it's an Emirati. Omanis, and you will see them there as well, Omanis tend to wear more of a skull cap rather than a headscarf. There's some beautiful historic mosques like this with the ceramic tile mosaic domes. So I really highly recommend, if you don't stay here, so many people who go to Dubai don't bother to explore this part of the city, and I think it's a shame because it really gives you a good insight into the daily life of people who aren't part of the tourist industry, and it's a little bit of a hint of what Dubai used to be like. Although not very far off, here's Burj Khalifa off in the distance, or Burj Dubai, I'm sorry. I did take abras. Here's a Sikh that I mentioned. He would have been from India probably. Again, a variety of locals. This guy is probably Omani, judging from his headdress, although not necessarily, because they often are more decorated than that. But to look at some of the more modern stuff, here's the metro system. And it has made Dubai a much more pleasant place to get around. It's much of it, other than the area that I've showed you thus far, most of Dubai is extremely car-centric. And it just makes it less enjoyable to get around on foot, certainly, and particularly with the heat. The metro opened in 2009, and it's basically, there's a couple of lines, but it more or less follows the coast. This is one of the big cross stations between the lines, and because it's Dubai, of course, they spared no expense in it. It's very beautifully appointed. All the stations are modern and gorgeous. This one had these incredible glass sculptures that are supposed to look like jellyfish. It's a very inexpensive one. You can buy multi-day passes that are incredibly cheap compared to, say, the T here in Boston. It's a very efficient system and will get you to most of the places that you would want to see as a tourist. An interesting thing about the metro is that on all the public transit, because again, this is a conservative Muslim country, they do have separate cars for women um, and women traveling with children. So you will see that marked out in the signs and the cars, and it's important to make sure you're standing in the right place. They are obviously very well aware that that is different from what most people in the world are used to. So they're very forgiving. If you were to make a mistake as someone who's obviously a tourist, they're not going to, police aren't going to come after you. They're just going to politely request that you move to the appropriate car or the appropriate end of the car. But it is something a little different to get used to. But it's, the metro is actually entirely automated. They have no drivers, no human drivers. It's a completely automated system, very fast, very efficient, air conditioned, which makes it nice. And now we'll take a look at some of the things in the more typically touristy visited part of the city. The Dubai Mall, I think this may have changed since I was there, but I believe it is still the largest mall anywhere in the world. It has hundreds of stores. There are 120 restaurants. It has 14,000 parking spaces and 13 million square feet. And this is just one of many malls in Dubai. You could spend an entire day and not even see a small corner of it. I'm not a big mall person myself. Shopping is one of the last things that I like to do when I'm traveling. But if it's incredibly hot, it's certainly a very pleasant place to go. They're beautifully designed, all of the malls. And because they're so over the top, even if you don't really like shopping, they're worth it to visit just because they're an attraction in and of themselves. So it is kind of fun to see just how huge they are. And again, like so much else in Dubai, no expense has been spared. The thing I think is sad is, like most malls around the world, you're going to see exactly the same stores that you see in a mall anywhere. So they don't really have, it's not the same as seeing a lot of Arabian stores that are unique to that country. You're going to see Tiffany's, and you're going to see Saks, and you're going to see, I think there was even a Sunglass Hut, and all that kind of stuff. So I find that kind of stuff rather boring. But the buildings alone are worth the visit. This particular one even has an aquarium, a full-size aquarium built in it, which you can visit. It has a separate ticket. But even without paying, they have this enormous, gigantic tank that you can look at for free, just as part of wandering through the mall. And there's some amazing decoration. This is one part of it that has a full-size dinosaur skeleton that they've spotlit with neon blue lights. That's kind of fun. Enormous numbers of restaurants. Someone asked in the comments about the cost of the food, and the answer to that is basically whatever you want. Food can be, you can eat in incredibly high-end 5-star restaurants if you want, or you can eat street food that costs nothing. There was a really nice food court not too far from where my hotel was. So I actually ate a lot of meals there because they had food from a lot of different cultures. They had Malaysian food, and they had Indian food, and all different kinds, and it was incredibly cheap. And so if you want to eat that way, you certainly can. If you want to splurge, you can do that too. Here's a guy drinking his espresso, and he's a Saudi, but drinking his coffee in the mall coffee shop. This was a famous sculpture at a fountain, actually, that's water dripping down in the back. A multi-story sculpture of divers, metallic divers. But you see such a variety of people. I think it's kind of fun. Here's an Emirati native with his son, and both of them sitting on their phones. Here's a nice view from the metro If you're on the metro, you can see most of the skyscrapers. It's a very nice, inexpensive way of getting a quick tour of all the development, because most of that is happening along the metro line. They are also planning a high-speed rail line. I'm not sure what the status of that is now, that would connect all the way from Kuwait, which is quite far north in the Persian Gulf, but basically all the way down the coast to Bahrain, Qatar, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and all the rest of the Emirates, and all the way down into Oman. It's an incredibly ambitious project, and I'm not sure where that stands right now, but it would be quite impressive if it's ever completed. And of course, because so much of that area is undeveloped desert, it's actually more feasible than in a lot of other parts of the world. Someone's asking if the air was clean. No. I can say that Dubai is environmentally unsustainable. Let's put it that way. They are a little bit more conscious of it than they used to be, but this is the desert. This is not a place with a lot of clean, fresh water. This is not a place with a lot of environmental sustainability in mind. And it's certainly not a place to build incredibly expensive malls and apartment buildings and offices that all require air conditioning and hot and cold water running up 100 stories. They have had a lot of financial trouble because their economy is so heavily dependent on oil, which for a long time has been fine, but 20, 30, 50 years from now, there may be no more oil in Arabia, or it may be too expensive to get out of the ground. So a lot of economists are kind of expecting that this whole area is headed for a crash if they don't make some changes in the way they look at their future development. And certainly both Dubai and Abu Dhabi in particular have been trying to emphasize more tourism, specifically for that reason, because basing all of your economy on oil is a very risky prospect right now. Dubai actually had to be bailed out by Abu Dhabi sometime in the last 10 years because they were significantly overextended in their development. It's a precarious situation. I would definitely feel uncomfortable if I were living there or working there or investing there. It all looks great until the bottom falls out. But in reference to the air again, even though it's the desert, it is right next to the ocean. So there is actually quite a bit of humidity and a lot of dust in the air. So depending on the weather and the time of year, there can be a certain amount of smog and dust and uncomfortable air. It certainly doesn't compare to a place like Beijing or Delhi or someplace like that, but it's something to be prepared for when you go there, definitely. These are some of the earliest skyscrapers that were built in Dubai quite a while ago, the Emirates Towers. And here's just some unusual, more recent buildings. They're cropping up. Like I would bet there's another 50 to 100 skyscrapers that have been built there since I was there a few years ago. The construction has really been just constant. And they pride themselves on having very unusual buildings that stand out. But again, this part of the city is much less enjoyable to get around on foot. This is called the Sheikh Zayed Road, which is the main thoroughfare that parallels the coastline, parallels all the skyscraper development, and parallels the metro line. It has anywhere from 12 to 14 lanes. Someone was also commenting that when they were there, the air was very clear. And I think that can actually be true. It wasn't bad when I was there. I think it really can depend significantly on the weather and the time of year. Like many other places in the world, when there are, like, I forget what they call them, like cold inversions that will keep smog from blowing away, and it really depends. This is a view of a building we'll see close up in a little bit, called Burj Al Arab, which is kind of one of the two iconic buildings of the city. It's I believe it's still the tallest hotel in the world. That may no longer be true, but it's certainly one of the tallest. And the Jumeirah Beach Hotel, which is right near it. They are both right on the coast. And this unusual building here, called the Mall of the Emirates, which is a very strange looking building. And that's because what's inside this part of it is an indoor ski slope. Because, of course, in the middle of the desert, you might occasionally want to go skiing. So you do it indoors. I don't know about sandstorms. Someone's asking about that. I assume it's possible. I don't remember hearing anything about it or reading anything about it. That may be something that isn't as common on the coast, but I honestly don't know. I would have to look that up to give you a better answer. Certainly nothing like that happened when I was there. And someone's also asking about what is in the buildings. They are, most of these skyscrapers are a mix of offices and residences. And you might guess that they are clearly tailored to the wealthy Emirati natives, as opposed to the guest workers who could not possibly afford to live in these places. Many of them are owned by wealthy people who may only be there for a short time. There are the wealthiest Emiratis don't necessarily even work. They may technically have a job, but they don't actually show up to it very often. It's an extremely financially unbalanced situation between the very small percentage, like 1 out of 10 people there who are native Emiratis who get free education, they don't pay taxes. If they get married, the wedding is paid for, they get free housing. And the 90% of the rest of the people who are doing all the construction and the labor and everything else. Dubai Marina is an area that's a little further north, a few miles north, and it's around a sort of artificially developed boat marina with coves and boat moorings and so forth, and a very dense concentration of skyscrapers. And it's a nice area to walk around. Here's an example of one of the mainline metro stations. They all look like this. They're very modern in style. And when you get up, as you're heading up the coast, you'll see there's the hotel off in the distance. We'll see that better in a little bit. And I wouldn't doubt that you've heard a lot about the development that has happened there. This particular one, called the Palm Jumeirah, is the first of 3 very similar developments, man-made islands off the coast into the Gulf, that added literally hundreds of miles of coastline. This one alone added 320 miles of coastline. And it's reached by a metro state, a separate metro. The main metro runs along here, and then you can take a shuttle. But it has its own dedicated metro that goes all the way out to the end. This is about, from the tip to the station here is probably about 3.5 miles or so. So it's pretty big. And these fronds that are supposed to give the illusion of a palm tree are mostly residential, with lavish homes built there. And then all around the outside are hotels and condo complexes and so forth. But in addition to Palm Jumeirah, which is this little one here, there's another one further up the coast that was just beginning construction when I was there. There's another one way down here. And this one, called the World, which is actually a couple of miles off the coast, is a bunch of artificial islands that were supposed to They're designed in the rough approximation of a map of the world. Many of them are still, they've been built, but nobody has actually purchased them or built anything on them. A lot of this development happened or was initiated right before the crash in 2008 that really put the kibosh on a lot of worldwide projects. So some of them have picked up again and others have not. So this marina area is, it's not a bad area. And if you were to stay as a tourist, this is not a bad place to base yourself. But construction, as you can see, is still rapidly moving apace. The sad thing about this particular development is that even while it was being built, it's sinking. And it is at risk of sea level rise. It's basically just rocks and sand. When they first started constructing it, they had major problems because that ring that went all the way around the outside was poorly planned. And so the interior parts where all of those beautiful homes were being built silted up very quickly. So there was a lot of algae and silt, and the water was getting cloudy. So they had to do a lot of cuts to help water circulation. So, whether this is the right kind of thing, right kind of development to be pursuing remains an open question. Particularly with climate change possibly affecting sea level rises, that building massive, expensive developments only a few meters above sea level is, let me just say, if I had several $1 million to buy a house, I wouldn't buy it here. There was actually supposed to be a Trump hotel built here, but in like 2011, long before he became president. And that's another project that went nowhere. The thing that is most best known here is the Atlantis Hotel. You may recognize this because there's another one much closer to us in the Bahamas, and it is a companion hotel owned by the same company. This one has more of an Arabian design to it. So that's why it has the sort of 1001 Nights look to it. And even if you don't stay there, it is a fun place to visit. It's, even if you're not a guest, you can stroll around the grounds, and they have restaurants that you can visit and so forth. It is very Disney-esque, but and very expensive, but it's quite something to see. They have their own aquarium. That's the whole concept of the hotel is that it's the lost city of Atlantis. So the building and the aquarium, there's all kinds of stuff to explore for kids. There's a water park, and all of it is based around the idea that it's the lost city of Atlantis. Here's just one of the public restrooms to give you an idea of how dramatic the design is. And this whole outer ring was originally intended to be a massive development of different themed hotels. This one, just maybe quarter of a mile away from the Atlantis, is called the Kingdom of Sheba Hotel, and it's both residences and hotel rooms. And I believe it's already open at this point. The style here is supposed to recall traditional Yemeni architecture from Yemen, further down the coast, south of Oman. And there's an enormous water park if you want to do that. But it's just a fascinating place. There's you feel like you're in the middle of this massive construction site. I did walk around the marina area, which was actually quite nice. There's some very beautiful buildings there, mostly residential, because the idea is they're very high-end condos built right around the waterfront. There's hotels as well. In fact, you can see the Marriott here. The Cayenne Tower, which is here, is kind of unusual. It's 1,000 feet high, all residential, and it's actually twists 90 degrees. and it was designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which is a famous American architectural firm, I think from Chicago. And that's one of the more unusual and striking buildings in this particular area. But for this very developed part of the city, it's actually a nice strollable district because it's all built around these artificial marina canals and pools, and there's restaurants and shops, and so it's not unlike walking around the Seaport district in Boston, for example. Very skyscraper oriented, though, of course. A little further south is the other iconic building of the city, and right next to it is the Madinat Jumeirah, which is also, again, a luxurious hotel, but it's designed to look like a very traditional Arabian market with a high-end souk and canals and hotels and restaurants and entertainment and so forth. And it has an amazing view of the Burj Al Arab, which is probably the most distinctive building in the whole city. Again, it's a beautiful place to escape the heat. You don't have to be staying there in order to walk around and enjoy the activities and the shops and restaurants. It's a pretty expensive area. And again, because going back to a question somebody asked earlier, because this is a sort of enclosed area aimed at tourism, foreign tourists, you can drink alcohol here. If you're in the pools, you can dress the way you would if you were anywhere else, because it's designed to be an enclosed space aimed at the tourist market. So it has, the expectations are very different from walking around the rest of the city. And towering over this whole area is Burj Al Arab. Here's, again, some examples of those wind towers that I showed you earlier. These, of course, are completely fake because this is a very modern building, but they've tried to give the same style of architecture to give you the feel of being in the old style Arab architecture. Now, the hotel, which we can see in the background, Burj Al Arab, is very deceptive. When it opened, it was the tallest hotel in the world. I don't think that's actually true anymore, because it's a fairly old building. It was built in 1999. It's on its own artificial island immediately off the coast. It's over 1,000 feet high, almost 1,100 feet high. You can see the helicopter pad way up at the top. What makes it a little bit deceptive is that what look like floors are actually not floors. These are at least 2 stories. Each one of those little stripes is twice as high as you think it is. In fact, there is an open air atrium in the middle of the hotel. And just to give you an idea of how large this is, the Eiffel Tower could fit with room to spare inside the atrium of this hotel. That's how huge it is. If you want to stay there, the cheapest rooms are around $1,200 a night. So needless to say, I did not stay there. You may remember there was some big PR about 15 years or so ago in the mid 2000s. There was a famous tennis match that Roger Federer and Andre Agassi played on a tennis court that they put on top of the helipad way up on top of the building. Someone is asking if tipping is expected, and honestly, I don't know, because I never ate in any place that would have expected tipping. That's something I would have to look up for you. Certainly any decent guidebook or quick internet search could probably tell you that. Most places outside the US have a very different tipping culture than we are, but Dubai is kind of its own I don't know where that fits in the scheme of things, so I would double check. I'm guessing that if you eat in high-end restaurants and you are staying in high-end hotels, probably the same kind of tipping culture would apply there. If you're eating in the kinds of places that I ate, absolutely not. But it would really depend on the kind of places that you're staying. This is another one of the huge malls. I found it not quite as stylish as the Dubai Mall, but it was worth visiting, if only to see the indoor ski complex, which you don't have to actually participate in. They have a place where you can go watch people doing it. It really is kind of an incredible thing. They even have penguins there. And of course, because this is Dubai, there is valet parking. If you do rent a car, you can get it valet parked there, especially if it's a Lamborghini or a Bentley. You'll see a lot of those when you pull up. The other place that I think is worth visiting is the what's called the Dubai Mall, which is right at the base of Burj Al Khalifa around a big artificial lake. And this is one of the other main tourist centers of the city, in part because of the tower, which is the tallest building in the world, but it's totally surrounded by all kinds of other things as well. Right next to it is a luxury residential building called the Address, downtown Dubai, which was a luxury hotel and condos that right before I got there, there was a big fire. So when I was there, you can see the whole building was completely covered in burlap, essentially, because they had this incredible fire. Fortunately, no one died in the fire because the building hadn't actually opened yet. It was not occupied, was still under construction, but it was on New Year's Eve, which made people think it might have been a terrorist act, but it turned out it wasn't. It was actually caused by a short circuit, but it was quite dramatic. And it was kind of funny when I was there to see this huge luxury building completely covered in burlap, because they had to rebuild the whole thing. They were also building a new opera house, which was under construction when I was there. It's since been completed, and was built to look like a dhow, kind of the shape of the traditional boat of the area. The highlight, of course, is Burj Khalifa. And I need to preface all of this by saying that I'm actually kind of afraid of heights, but there's no way I can go to the tallest building in the world and not go up it. So I did. And just to give you a little perspective here, these are some of the other tall buildings in the world. It is twice as tall as the Empire State Building. And of course, there's a lot of debate about how to measure skyscrapers, because a lot of times they have aerial antennas at the top, and do you count that, and so forth. But just by way of comparison, you can see the Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building, the Petronas Towers, which I've seen in Kuala Lumpur, the former World Trade Center in New York. So by comparison, you can see just how tall and very delicate Burj Khalifa is. It has 167 floors. It's 2,700 feet high. That's over half a mile high, which is kind of, it's just mind-boggling. And of course, it towers over everything in the city and can be seen from miles and miles away. It was originally called Burj Dubai, but it was renamed after the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, Khalifa, because I mentioned earlier, Abu Dhabi had to financially bail out Dubai at some point in the last decade or so. So they renamed the tower in thanks to him. It's actually quite a beautiful building as skyscrapers like this go. It's very delicate. It has a lot of beautiful details on it. You can visit it. It's fairly expensive. I think its tickets to go up range anywhere from $100 to $150. So you have to really want to go up. And you can visit any one of 3 different levels. The highest level that you can go to is the 148th floor. You can also visit the 124th and 125th floor, and the prices vary depending on what you want to do. but it is quite an experience. And they're timed, so I timed it to go up late in the day, which is I would recommend because you can once you get up there, you can stay for quite a while. And if you get a chance to see the sunset over the city, that's a really nice time to be there. It's so high, it almost doesn't feel like being in a building. It's more like being in an airplane. And the views up and down the coast are just spectacular. Again, this is very late in the afternoon as the sun is going down and there's a lot of humidity in the air. This is looking back up towards the marina area and the financial district. In fact, I think, can you see back there? The place that I was staying is kind of way off in this distance where there's hardly any skyscrapers. That's where the creek comes in. Here I am proving that I was actually on the 148th floor. But you can see all the development and how very, like immediately outside the immediate city area, there's just lots of open desert, which is gradually being gobbled up for additional development. This is the mall, the Dubai Mall. This entire area here is all one gigantic mall. And there's a bunch of artificial lakes and just condo complexes, shopping malls, hotels, restaurants, all kinds of things, office buildings. Again, looking up north, and you can see the palm built structures built out into the Gulf and the hotel that we just saw a little bit ago. It's kind of hard to see. This is taken late in the day, looking through glass windows, but the little islands that you can see off in the distance there are that development that I mentioned called the World. There's about 300 or so artificial islands designed to be in the rough shape of the world globe, the different continents and so forth. After years of development, there are only a handful of them that have actually been purchased and developed. So it's kind of fun. If you go on Google Maps or Google Earth, you can zoom in and look at some of these coastal developments and see it's very clear which ones have been purchased and not, because some of them are just sand and some of them have development and landscaping, and you can see fancy houses built on them. Interestingly, for a building as tall as this, you can actually go outside. There is an open air terrace, so you can go outside and look pretty much straight down 2,000 feet. That's my foot. I had to take this to prove to all of my friends who know I'm afraid of heights that I actually did this, and this is actually open. There's no glass there. So I'm very proud of the fact that I did that. I think I did need a drink before I did it and probably after, but I did it nonetheless. Looking down again to, this is the opera house that was being built and some of the other structures in the area. But it is kind of funny to be up that high and see something that would otherwise be, these other buildings that you're seeing here are probably comparable to the John Hancock Tower in Boston. And we're, 2 or 3 times the size of that. It's really quite incredible. The problem with going up the tallest building in the world is that it may not stay that way for long. There are already a number of projects in the pipeline. Most of them are either in Asia, in East Asia, or in elsewhere in the Arab world, that will probably, if they come to fruition, will be taller than this. It's a nice area to walk around at night as well, because there's an incredible fountain display. The whole area gets lit up. The tower gets lit up. And again, going back to what I mentioned very early on, it's an incredibly safe place to be. So being out at night and strolling around all these areas to enjoy the nightlife is very, very safe. How are we doing on time? I'm going to finish up with a quick tour through Abu Dhabi. If I were to go here again, I think there is certainly more to see in Dubai than in Abu Dhabi. Either one could be a day trip from the other. And Abu Dhabi is developing far more. But I think Abu Dhabi is really more, is a bit more sedate than the sort of Las Vegas feel that you get in Dubai. So I think what I did was I based myself in Dubai and went up to visit Abu Dhabi. And I think that's probably preferable to doing it the other way around. You could kind of think of it as Abu Dhabi is Washington to Dubai's New York City. It's a little bit more sedate. It is the second largest city after Dubai. It's still quite large, but it is the capital of the 7 of the Emirates. It takes about 2 hours by car or bus to get between them. And the demographics is quite similar. It's about 2 million people, so a little bit smaller. But again, 80 to 85% of the population there is actually not Emirati. They are guest workers from countries all over the world, either working in companies there or doing construction and other kinds of things. What's interesting to note is that given how big these cities are and how much development has happened, the highway that connects the two cities between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, only 2 hours, wasn't completed until around 1990, which is kind of incredible. So it's a different kind of city to walk around. It is actually more walkable than Dubai. Many of the things that you might want to see there are within a relatively small area, so you could walk. And there's a very lovely coastal promenade. It's a mix of traditional and modern. And there's a very nice park that's been built where you can walk all the way along the base of all the skyscrapers, looking out towards the barrier islands. And if you go out to the barrier island and look back at the main city where most of the skyscrapers are, it's kind of on a breakwater. There is a nice reconstruction there of life similar to what they have in Dubai. There's an area called Heritage Park, which I think is a bit overrated for what it is, but you can still walk around it without having to pay. And it gives you a little bit of a feel of what Abu Dhabi would have been like before in the pre-oil days. And if nothing, it has, it's a pleasant place to stroll, maybe have some lunch. You can see the old fort and get a beautiful view back to the city over the canals. Again, there's a lot of other tourist construction going on here. There are plenty of boat rides. Like most tourist cities these days, they have to have a gigantic Ferris wheel. There's some big hotels going up. Lots and lots of modern skyscrapers. This was a fascinating place to see. This is the Royal Palace for the Emir of Abu Dhabi. And obviously you can't go in, but you can drive by it. It's quite impressive. Not far from it is the Emirates Palace Hotel, which you can stay in. This hotel cost $6 billion, that's with a B, dollars to build. It has 114 of these beautiful ceramic domes. And it also has a performance center and concert halls and a lot of function rooms and art galleries and so forth. So it's kind of a big cultural center for the city, in addition to being a luxury hotel. But like Dubai, there's an incredible amount of construction going on, very modern, very long and confusing street names in both English and Arabic. This was fascinating. This building that looks kind of like a big shoe is kind of on the outskirts of the city, and it is the Hyatt Regency Hotel. The main reason I would recommend going to Abu Dhabi, and even if you only went for a day trip and didn't see anything else, it's absolutely worth doing only for this. The Sheikh Zayed Mosque, which was started by the late president and finished in 2007, I believe. He's in fact is buried on the grounds. This is a massive mosque. It can hold more than 40,000 people, worshipers. And it's one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. And it is for a building that was built so recently. This is not hundreds of years old, but it is absolutely stunning. And it is also one of the few mosques in the UAE that non-Muslims are allowed to visit. You can't go into the prayer hall, but you can visit most of the rest of the complex. And as I said, even if you do nothing else in Abu Dhabi, do this. It was built by a number of by workers and materials from and deliberately so, from a number of different Muslim cultures throughout the world, mostly inspired by Persian and Indian architecture. It's completely covered in marble and mosaics. It has the world's largest carpet in it, in the prayer hall. And I actually was very lucky to be there on a day when the weather changed very rapidly. So it was beautifully sunny, and a few minutes later, a storm came through. So the clouds were different. It was just, to see it in different kinds of light is really quite stunning. And the architecture is just incredible. All of the designs that you can see here are semi-precious stones done as mosaics. And there's an enormous courtyard in the middle. Again, if you go through these doors, you would enter the prayer hall, and only Muslims can go in there. But most of the rest of the building you would be able to visit. One of the minarets, I forget which one, has a research library with Islamic texts that are on display. That's worth a visit as well. And it's an education center, both for people studying the documents, and also just anyone non-Muslims are welcome to go in there as well. The detail is mind-boggling. I don't know how much it cost to build, but I imagine it was quite a bit. So everything that you're seeing here that's in white is marble, both interior and exterior. Here's the library that I mentioned, the research library, which is worth going up, not just to see some of the things that they have on display, but also because it's up in the minaret. It's one of the few places that you can go as a tourist and get a higher up view of the complex, looking out the windows. I would not want to be one of the people who has to sweep and mop the massive sized marble courtyard. There are any number of tours. If you're staying in Dubai, you could certainly do this on your own by taking a very inexpensive intercity bus and taxis and so forth. But it's also very easy to take, like you can in so many cities in the world. You could take just a day tour from Dubai on an organized tour that will take you to a number of the popular spots to visit in Abu Dhabi just for the day. And those aren't terribly expensive either. The rest of the city is worth seeing as well. Here's the bridge that goes over to the mainland. Abu Dhabi is actually on a number of islands, both natural and artificial. And what's a little strange about it that you wouldn't expect in this part of the world is there's a lot of mangrove swamps, the kind that you would see in Florida or Georgia. I really didn't expect that in the Persian Gulf, but there's a lot of public parks all along these mangrove islands, which is surprisingly lush. You don't see that really in Dubai. It's also another emirate that seemed to be obsessed with petunias, and architecture that is both stunningly beautiful and very strange. The outlying islands were still under a great deal of development. Abu Dhabi discovered oil earlier than Dubai, so it has quite a bit more oil reserves than Dubai does. But on the other hand, development in Abu Dhabi is kind of lagging behind Dubai, although it's catching up, certainly. And a lot of this completely open desert land on the mainland and on these islands just off the coast is very rapidly being developed. And one of the biggest things, I'm sorry this wasn't finished when I was there, it has since opened, is a branch of the Louvre Museum in Paris that was designed by the award-winning architect Jean Nouvel. There were a lot of delays in the construction, but it opened, I want to say I think by 2017, it had finally opened. And it's an enormous stainless steel dome that has just incredibly elaborate multi-layered ceilings. There's a lot of ugly architecture, as I mentioned, in both cities. Back in Dubai, I'm going to show you one last mall just because it was kind of fun. On the outskirts of the city is the Ibn Battuta Mall, which is kind of like a little theme park. It has all the same lousy mall stores that you'd find anywhere, but it's elaborately decorated and named after a 14th century explorer, Berber explorer from North Africa. And the mall is divided into all these different areas based on where he explored in the world. So there's a food court that looks like Tunisia. There's a whole section that's supposed to look like Egypt, Persia, India. You'll notice the Indian food court even has a Cinnabon. There's an area devoted to China. So it's kind of interesting. It's a little cheesy, but it's fun and it's air conditioned. And the decoration is certainly fun. I think kids would certainly enjoy it. It almost has the feel of that part of Disney World in Epcot where it's supposed to look like different countries. But there is some truly awful architecture as well. Things that were thrown up pretty quickly, including these cheap twin copies of the Chrysler Building in New York that look pretty tacky. There's even, this is after all a Muslim country, so instead of TGI Fridays, they have a cheap knockoff called TGI Thursdays. But I'll finish the program just by showing you a few last scenes where I went back to the part of the city I liked the best, where I was staying, around the creek, where you can get lots of fun street food. Nightfall there was just beautiful because, of course, the sun is setting through the desert haze, turns everything orange. And there's lots of activity with people crossing the river in the little boats. And I really enjoyed just kind of strolling, just exploring little alleyways. Exploring the port. And sunsets there really are quite gorgeous, particularly when they light up the creek. So I will finish the program there, and I'm going to stop my screen share. And then we will catch up with any outstanding questions in the Q&A. See if I've missed anything. Let's see. currency. There is local currency, yes. And I'm forgetting what it is now. I want to say it was dinars, probably. I've forgotten. You'd think I would know that off the top of my head. But yes, credit cards are widely accepted all over Dubai. I think the only place that it's always worthwhile having a little bit of local currency, probably mainly for things like, you know, buying street food. If you're just buying something that costs very little money, and actually, another good example would be the boats that went across the boats that traveled across the creek. Those were so cheap. You definitely can't use a credit card there. They're so cheap that you're literally paying with a coin that probably has the value of 25 US cents. I don't think you would need to have much local currency unless you are planning to do a lot of that little street stuff where you might just be paying for something that you buy for a street vendor or something like that. But I think pretty much anywhere else that you are buying anything in a mall, anything in an actual store, established store, a restaurant, a food court, anything like that, you're going to be able to use credit cards, definitely. My favorite food. You know what I was disappointed by, I think, was that I wanted to eat a lot of local traditional food, and there isn't much. To be perfectly honest, I didn't find much because, again, like native Arabian culture is not very present in Dubai because so many of the people that you see and so many of the restaurants that you're going to go to are run by guest workers, expats. So you can get Indian food, Pakistani food, Bangladeshi food, you can get African food, you can get, but the number of places where you can get traditional Arabian food it's very hard to come by. I found much more of that in Oman because again, I will talk up Oman and I would love to do a presentation on Oman for you because I much preferred it to Dubai. I found Dubai fascinating. I really enjoyed traveling there. It was a great experience. But in terms of culture, I loved Oman. I would go back to Oman in a second. And it's so different, so very much more traditional. And I just found it like almost night and day to compare the two places in the same trip. I think you might be likely to find traditional Arab food in some of the high-end restaurants. But those are, it can be really expensive to stay in those places. So unless your budget is, unless you have a really expensive budget, you may not, you aren't likely to find that. I just ate a lot of different food from street vendors and the food courts near me, which had really good food, little local places. Good Malaysian food, good Indian food, good, there was a lot of African food. There's a good number of people. In past centuries, there was a lot of trade between the Arab countries in this area and East Africa. So down in Tanzania, Zanzibar, there was a lot of trade, both historical and even recently, between those areas. So there are a lot of workers who come from East African countries and bring their culture too. So I actually enjoyed just trying a lot of the different kinds of foods from countries that I wasn't actually in, but there were locals selling it. Let's see, what am I missing? September, I think, will be a pretty good time to be there, those of you who are going in September. What is my background photo? Oh, you mean in Zoom? My background photo right here is my house in Greece. I have a house in southern Greece and in a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere, and I'll be there in 2 weeks sitting in that chair with an ouzo. What else? Best months to go, I would say our fall and winter are probably the best times, weather-wise. Weather is the main reason why you would go one time or another. Because it gets unbearably hot, like well over 100 degrees. So when I was there, which was our winter, was a very hot, but comfortable and manageable hot, like 80, 85 at the most. And in the evenings, it actually got pleasant, not chilly, but comfortable evening temperatures. Where am I traveling next? I leave in 2 weeks for my house in Greece. And I haven't actually traveled. I've done a lot of travel to Greece recently just because of the house. The trips that I hope to do, my next exotic trips, and I don't have anything planned, but the places I would love to travel next, if I can do it, is Georgia the country, not Georgia the state. I would really like to go hiking in Georgia, and I really want to go to Uzbekistan. I might wait until Putin stops invading countries in that area before I travel there. We'll see. Where are the best air routes from Boston to arrive in Dubai? That I don't, there's a lot. Dubai is very well connected. I'm sure there are direct flights from the US. I don't know if there are direct flights from Boston. You can certainly get there from JFK, I'm sure. I don't remember where I went through, but I want to say it was probably Germany. I'm guessing I went through someplace like Frankfurt. I don't really remember. And then to get to Oman, if you wanted to travel around that area, flights to Oman are very cheap and take like an hour and a half. So if you wanted to tack on something like that, that's pretty easy. But all of the major, the Emirates and Qatar Airways, there's a bunch of Persian Gulf airlines that have very good connections and very good service also throughout Europe and the US. So I don't think it would be difficult for you to find an easy way to get there. I just don't know if there's anything direct from Boston. I'd have to double check that. And it's worth looking, since a lot of those flights often stop at places along the way, like if you took Kuwait Airlines or you took Qatar Airlines, you could, that would be a good way to take a couple of days and stop in Doha or stop in Kuwait City, or and add something along the way where you see something in the area, and make a pit stop along the way. Yes, I would love to do my Oman program with you. It's one of my favorite countries that I visited, and certainly did not expect that. I was immensely surprised by how much I loved Oman. A lot of Oman was the kind of traditional stuff that I showed you in this program is in Oman, but it's real. It's hundreds of years old, and there are gorgeous villages, and I rented a car and spent a week and a half just driving around the countryside. It was amazing. So I guess that's all the questions.
I think you did it, Jeff. I think you did it.
Robert is, I know, is sending out the recording information about the recording tomorrow with some other information in it. And I told him to feel free to include my email. So I know I saw a couple of you in the chat are planning to travel there sometime soon. So you or anybody do feel free to send me personal emails. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them if I can. But if there's no other questions, I guess that's it. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again. I know I'm doing a program for you in August, and I forget where we're going. Did we decide already?
We are going to Norway.
Does
that sound right, Jeff?
I think so. Norway is very, very different.
Yeah, so we have Jeff booked for Norway on Tuesday, August 16th at 2 o'clock. So essentially 2 months from today, if my math is correct, or roughly. Yeah. So Jeff, thank you so much. Wonderful job as expected. You were very
Thank you for
generous with
having
your
me.
time. Yeah, very thorough. Folks, look for that email tomorrow with the recording, the feedback survey, Jeff's email address, and information on how to sign up for Jeff's program in August. So
Great.
thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. And Jeff, I hope you enjoy Greece next month.
Totally expect to. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next time.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.